I started preparing for my baby shower at the beginning of April, when I was already huge at 33 weeks pregnant. My little house in the suburbs of Portland, once quiet, was now filled with cardboard boxes, pastel balloons, and cloud-themed invitations. I didn't hire a planner, no one offered to help. I handled everything myself. Every dish, every ribbon, every soft track I picked to play as the guests arrived. I ordered a vanilla cake with lavender buttercream from my favorite bakery. Even though I didn't have much of a budget, I still wanted everything to feel right. I chose a light mousse filling, thinking it would be easier for everyone to eat, especially my grandma, who always complained that sweets hurt her teeth. I went grocery shopping early Saturday morning, even though my back ached and my ankles had started to swell. I carried the bags home, arranged everything on the kitchen counter, then sat down and caught my breath in silence. No one asked if I needed anything. My mom said she was working overtime at the school library, and my brother Caleb was getting in the right headspace for his high school spring formal. Still, I kept going. I tidied up the living room, wiped down every window frame, and cleared out all the leftover moving boxes from the corners. I washed the ivory tablecloths and carefully pressed each crease flat. Deep down, I had one small hope. A peaceful afternoon. A little warmth and a sense of being seen, not as someone who'd made a mistake and got pregnant, like Mom once said, but as someone about to become a mother, someone trying to do the right thing for the baby girl growing inside her. I made a playlist of soft acoustic songs. It took me nearly 2 hours to put it together. I wanted the atmosphere to be gentle, the kind where people could sit and talk, or listen to the quiet hum of a mom-to-be. I imagined my daughter growing up in that kind of calm. The night before the party, I stayed up until nearly midnight hanging tissue garlands around the doorframe, strand by strand, using craft store glue. No one held the ladder while I stretched to tie them up high. I just hoped I wouldn't slip. At that point, I still had hope. I believed that maybe, just this once, they would show up, really show up, for me. My mom used to say everything's going to be okay, and I held on to that the way I held the handrail each morning when I came down the stairs. I told myself maybe once they saw all I'd done, they'd smile, hug me, and tell me I did great. I didn't need big words or expensive gifts. I just needed them to see me as part of this family, not the shadow left behind every time it was Caleb's turn. That morning, I walked into the living room and looked around one last time before the guests arrived. The early spring light filtered through the curtains, casting a glow on the sign I'd cut and glued by hand. Welcome, baby Emma. Beneath it was a small table with pastries, fruit, and a pot of chamomile tea I'd already brewed. I gently placed my hand on my belly, where my baby had just kicked hard, like she was excited too. I wasn't expecting a picture-perfect party out of a magazine. I just hoped that for a fleeting moment, I could be the main character in my own story. No one interrupting, no one stealing the spotlight. But I was wrong. People started arriving around 1 p.m. First came Aunt Margaret, carrying a small basket full of embroidered handkerchiefs and a few worn children's books she said she used to read to me. Then my college friend Jenny, 6 months pregnant, walked in with a warm smile and a silver-wrapped gift box. At first, everything was just as I'd hoped. Soft wishes, gentle laughter, genuine hugs. I thought, maybe this time it'll be different. I started to relax. I even laughed out loud when a 3-year-old, Laura's son, reached up and tapped a dangling balloon with wonder. The atmosphere was simple but caring, and I truly believed this was my day. Until my mother tapped her fork against her glass. A sharp ting cut through the room, and everyone fell silent. She stood there in a teal dress, wearing that familiar smile, the one she always had before announcing something big. My dad stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her back like a seal of support. Before we cut the cake, my mother said in an oddly sweet voice, "We have some exciting news to share." I froze. My heart started pounding, like my body already knew what was coming. The kitchen door swung open and Caleb walked out, holding up a bright red envelope. "I got into Princeton!" he shouted, his face glowing. The room erupted. Someone clapped. Aunt Margaret gasped, "Oh my goodness, how wonderful!" One of my mom's friends even got up and hugged Caleb like she'd raised him herself. I looked around. No one was looking at me anymore. Or at the lavender cake. They all surrounded Caleb, my 17-year-old brother who had never done the dishes or made his bed, and whose tutoring bills I'd paid for the past 2 years. The cake I ordered, with "Welcome Sweet Emma" written on top, was pushed aside to make room for the pizza someone had just ordered. Someone turned on music. Loud, bouncy hip-hop, Caleb's favorite, completely drowning out the soft acoustic guitar I'd picked the night before. The laughter got louder, the room filled with stomping feet, clinking glasses, and the sound of Caleb's friends barging in, none of whom I'd ever met. One guy in a backwards baseball cap shouted, "Party's on, bro!" and fired up a Bluetooth speaker, bass shaking the walls like it was a graduation bash. I stood there, still holding my lukewarm chamomile tea, the mom-to-be sash slipping off my shoulder. No one turned to ask how I felt. No one mentioned the baby. The gifts were shoved into a corner, the Emma banner hidden behind a hand-drawn sign, "Congrats, Caleb, Princeton." A bottle of soda, carelessly opened, spilled across the table, running dangerously close to the cake. I grabbed some napkins and bent down to clean it. My knees throbbed from kneeling, my belly pressing against my cotton dress. As I wiped up the sticky frosting smears on the hardwood floor, a blonde girl brushed past me like I was an old decoration. She didn't say excuse me. I heard Caleb's booming voice from behind, talking about campus tours and dream dorms. I kept cleaning. No one stopped. No one saw me. Everything revolved around one person, just like always. I was used to that. But this time was different. I forced myself to stand, back aching, hands sticky with frosting and soda. I looked around the crowded room, full of people who weren't really there for me. My mother was telling a dramatic story about how she'd sacrificed so much to help Caleb reach his Ivy League dream. My father nodded, like he'd personally raised a genius. No one mentioned the person about to give birth. No one noticed me walking out of the noise, clutching my belly. I went into the kitchen, washed my hands, then quietly climbed the stairs. The music kept thumping downstairs, the cheers drifting up like echoes from another world. But in my head, one thought remained. This time, they crossed the line, and I wasn't going to let it slide like I had before. I sat on the bed, legs stretched out, back propped against a pile of pillows, hands cradling my belly like a silent shield. The laughter rising from the living room felt like dull blades scraping against my chest. Downstairs, the party for Caleb's Princeton acceptance was in full swing. In the house I bought, with money earned from sleepless nights, packing orders, handling returns, and making it through low sale months, they celebrated a success that wasn't mine. And honestly, it never was, at least not to them. I slowly closed my eyes, trying not to cry. But the memories didn't need permission to return. I remembered being 11 and my favorite purple princess dress being shredded by school scissors. Caleb was 9 then. When asked, he just shrugged and said, "I didn't take care of it." My mother waved it off, told me not to be dramatic. It was just a piece of fabric and I needed to learn to let things go. Caleb got taken out for ice cream right after. "To forget the fuss," she said. When I was in 8th grade, I was selected to attend a gifted science program at the local university. I brought the invitation home, excited to show my dad. He skimmed it, then asked one question. "Does it cost money?" I nodded. He shook his head and told me to focus on more practical things. 2 years later, when Caleb got accepted into a robotics summer camp, my dad didn't hesitate. He pulled out a check right away. "It's an investment in the future," he said. I lost count of how many times I did chores alone while Caleb played video games all afternoon. I used to think if I worked hard enough, I'd be recognized, but no. When I cleaned the whole house, my mom said, "That's what girls are supposed to do." When Caleb remembered to water the plants once, she praised him for being thoughtful about nature. Then, when I was 19, I decided not to go to college. Not because I didn't want to, but because no one supported me. I once mentioned studying graphic design, but my mom shook her head. Drawing won't feed anyone, she said. You should get a stable job. So I applied at a print shop and spent my evenings building an online store selling handmade decor. I did everything myself, learned product photography, SEO, customer service. No one asked if I was tired. When the store started bringing in steady income, I saved enough to put a down payment on this little house, the one I live in now. The one they moved into without asking after I gave them a tour to show off what I'd accomplished. I remember my mom's face so clearly. First surprise, then tears, then a soft whisper. So the whole family finally has a home. No one asked if I wanted to share. They just brought their things in, rearranged the furniture, and called it our house. Caleb, then a 10th grader, already had a brand new MacBook my parents bought him. I was still using an old laptop I salvaged from a repair shop. I once paid to fix Caleb's car after he dented the back door on the way to tutoring because my mom said, "He's still young, it was just an accident." I still remember going to my first trimester ultrasound alone, driving nearly an hour to the clinic. When I told my mom I was pregnant, she was silent for a moment and then asked, "Does the baby's father know?" No congratulations, no hug. That night they brought it up at dinner. Caleb laughed and said, "Wow, guess I'm gonna have to share the Wi-Fi with a baby now." Every time I think about these things, I ask myself why I kept giving. Maybe I hoped they'd notice, that they'd change, that they'd love me the way I kept trying to love them, despite everything. But there's one thing I don't hope for anymore. I bent down, opened my nightstand drawer, and took out a gray folder. Inside were the house deed, utility bills in my name, and a file I'd been quietly preparing for weeks. Bold, clear words. Undeniable. I ran my fingers over the first page, feeling like I was touching something sacred. Proof that I hadn't imagined the unfairness. I didn't want to cry anymore. I just wanted to reclaim my space. The next morning, just as the sun began to rise, I was already up. The house still carried the sticky smell of spilled soda and melted frosting from yesterday's party. I stood in the kitchen, holding a warm cup of peppermint tea, feeling nothing but stillness. In the breeze coming through the window, I could hear Caleb's steady snoring from his room and the creaking of the wooden chair in the living room, where my dad usually sat each morning with his lukewarm coffee. I wasn't hesitating anymore. I pulled 3 white envelopes from the kitchen drawer. Each one was sealed, labeled clearly Diana, my mom, Mark, my dad, and Caleb. Inside was a copy of a 30-day notice to vacate the premises, along with a property deed showing I was the sole legal owner. I placed them neatly on the dining table, the same one where they always left dirty dishes for me to clean. Among the leftover mess from the party, the 3 white envelopes stood out like slashes across velvet. I didn't wait long. At exactly 7:15, my mom walked into the kitchen, her hair still messy, holding a mug of soy milk. She yawned, her eyes scanning the table, then stopping. "What's this?" she said, still groggy, but I heard the edge in her voice. She picked up an envelope and tore it open right there. After just a few lines, her eyes widened. Her mug tilted slightly, almost spilling. "Olsen," she called out, louder now. "This has to be some kind of joke, right?" I stepped into the room from the hallway, calm and steady. "It's not," I said. "I've already sent the official letter. These are just copies for the family." She looked at me like I'd just announced I was selling the house to strangers. "Move out? How could you write something like this? This is our home." "No, Mom," I said, looking her in the eye. "This is my home. I bought it. I pay the mortgage. I cover the utilities, the internet, even the plumbing repair you called an outrageous couple hundred a few weeks ago. It's all me." My dad came in from the living room, still groggy but frowning now as he looked at the papers on the table. He grabbed one, skimmed it, then turned to me. "What kind of stunt is this? You're pregnant, and now you want to cause stress in the house?" "It's because I'm pregnant that I can't keep living like this," I said, placing a hand on my belly. "I don't want my daughter growing up in a house where her mother is ignored and walked over every day." Caleb finally wandered in, hair a mess, headphones still around his neck. He looked around and asked sleepily, "What's going on? Why is it so loud?" "She's kicking us out of the house," my mom hissed, her voice sharp like metal scraping glass. Caleb looked at me like I was some villain in a movie. "Are you serious? Just because I got into Princeton yesterday? That was no big deal." I let out a dry laugh. "It's not just because of yesterday. It's because of every day before that. Every time you got favored and I was told, 'You're the girl, you should be more understanding.' Every time I achieved something and Mom said, 'Don't brag too much.' When I got pregnant, everyone acted like nothing happened. But when you got that acceptance letter, the whole world stopped spinning for you." My dad tried to smooth things over. "Come on, Allison, everyone says things they don't mean. Don't blow this out of..." "You're calling the years I spent being treated like a maid blowing things out of proportion?" I cut him off. "I paid for this roof, but Mom told the neighbors the whole family built this together. Caleb wrecked his car, I paid to fix it, and Mom scolded me for bringing it up too much. No one ever asked if I needed help, if I was tired, if I was okay. And then when I threw a party for myself, the whole family turned it into someone else's stage." No one said anything for a long time. No one could argue. I looked at my mom, now trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. "I'm not doing this out of hate. I'm doing it out of love, for myself, and because I refuse to let Emma grow up in a family where everything comes at the cost of silence and self-sacrifice." Caleb took a step back. "So where are we supposed to sleep? At a hotel or something?" "I've planned it," I said. "I have a list of short-term rentals, movers if needed. One of my friends even offered to help pack. You have 30 days. My mom stared at me like she had no idea who I was. Maybe she never really did. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving behind stunned faces. Each step I took was a reminder of something they couldn't undo. This time, I wasn't backing down. This time, I chose myself. In the days that followed, the house felt like water stretched tight before a storm. No one said anything direct, but every slam door, every side glance, every heavy step in the hallway sent the same message. They weren't leaving without a fight. My mom started her emotional campaign the way she always did. She called Aunt Hannah, the only relative in Arizona I still talked to, and tearfully told her I was kicking my parents out while pregnant. A day later, I got a long message from Aunt Hannah. "Sweetheart, no matter how upset you are, don't let your daughter grow up without her grandparents. Family is forever." Alice's eyes were truly red. My dad took a different route. He suddenly started doing chores, things he hadn't done in all 24 years I lived with him. He wiped counters, took out the trash, even tried chatting with me in the mornings. "Did you sleep okay?" But I knew exactly what that was. Not guilt. Strategy. A way to soften me, to pull me back into the dutiful daughter role they had always assigned me. Caleb didn't bother hiding his hostility. He started blasting music in his room, slamming doors every time he walked past me, and didn't hold back with snide remarks at dinner. One night, as I was arranging flowers on the table, he walked by and muttered, "Not sure how you plan to raise a kid when no one's around to help wash the dishes." I didn't respond. I just quietly tucked another sprig of lavender into the vase. Then things went beyond what any family should tolerate. One Tuesday morning, I received an email from a major supplier, someone I was negotiating with for a potential partnership next quarter. They said they'd heard some things from a relative about me showing signs of emotional instability and possibly being unfit to manage operations after giving birth. I sat frozen in my office, staring at the flickering screen, then exhaled slowly. I knew exactly who was behind it. I printed the email and filed it into the gray folder, the one where I kept all legal documents. I'd hired a lawyer the week before. She was a friend of an old friend, well-versed in legal eviction processes in Oregon, and not swayed by pleas like, "But they're your biological parents." But I didn't get angry. I didn't call to confront anyone. I just forwarded the scanned email to my attorney, along with the records I'd been collecting, utility bills, home repair receipts, the mortgage agreement, even photos of the house when I moved in. Completely empty before they arrived. On day 17, my mom started crying loudly every evening. She didn't talk to me directly, just made dramatic laments in the living room about sleepless nights worrying about Allison, about thankless sacrifices, and the nights she stayed up when I was sick as a child. I walked past, noise-canceling headphones on, and kept updating the baby registry on my laptop. On day 21, Caleb tried playing the responsibility card. He sat across from me in the kitchen, for the first time since getting the notice. "If you kick us out, I'll have nowhere to study," he said, voice trembling. "I could lose my scholarship. I might not even get to go to Princeton." I looked at him, not angry, not sympathetic. I know how that feels. I didn't have anyone supporting me when I wanted to go to college either. And you know what? I still made it. On day 24, they stopped talking altogether. No more crying, no more guilt tripping, just a heavy silence, thick like fog. The kind that doesn't lead to reconciliation, only quiet preparation for the inevitable. I kept everything going as usual: work, rest, prenatal checkups. My best friend Clarissa came over a few times to help set up the baby's room. We played soft music, chatted about baby names, and picked out a few wall decorations. I tried to build a small world for my daughter, one where no one could take away my role as her mother. Day 30 arrived on a calm, sunny morning. I woke up early, not out of worry, but because my body had grown used to the peace of not being interrupted. They packed in silence. My mom walked the hallway with a stiff expression. My dad said nothing as he dragged suitcases down the stairs. Caleb, the last to leave, stood in the doorway with his backpack slung over one shoulder, staring at me. "You'll regret this," he said, voice dry. "No one's gonna stand by you forever." I just nodded. And I don't need anyone standing beside me to be myself. The door closed behind them, and for the first time in years, the house felt bigger, brighter. Not just because the furniture was gone, but because the heaviness had left with them. It's been over a year since that door shut behind them, and my little house has finally learned how to breathe again. Every morning I make coffee in a kitchen that's no longer cluttered with dirty mugs or misplaced dish rags. Every night I rock Emma to sleep in a room glowing with soft light, her name hand-stitched and hanging on the wall, not hidden behind a Congrats Caleb banner or anyone else's shadow. Emma is a calm but fierce little girl, with my eyes and the same dimpled cheeks my dad used to have. Every time I look at her, I know I made the right choice. Not because of what I avoided, but because of what I've built. A real home. My business is steady. After giving birth, I took a month off and returned gradually, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I've hired a delivery assistant and a part-time order manager. My small online shop is now listed among the city's trusted local businesses. I'm not chasing flashiness, but it's enough to keep me from worrying about bills anymore. As for my old family, news still trickles in the way it always has, through distant relatives who don't really care about me but love to gossip. I heard Caleb dropped out after his first semester at Princeton, not because of grades, but because he couldn't handle living on his own. He wasn't used to cooking, doing laundry, managing his own schedule, or handling anything I used to silently take care of. While his classmates were applying for internships, Caleb was still struggling to build a timetable that didn't have overlapping classes. I didn't feel vindicated, but I wasn't surprised either. After leaving my house, my parents moved in with my uncle in Salem. According to a cousin on my dad's side, they were given a small room and asked to get back on their feet. But within 6 months, tension erupted. My mom complained that the kitchen wasn't clean enough, while my dad refused to chip in for the electric bill, citing financial hardship. In the end, my uncle, once incredibly generous, asked them to leave. Since then, they've bounced around, sometimes in cheap motels, sometimes crashing with acquaintances, but nowhere lasted long. They never contacted me again, and I didn't try to reconnect either. Sometimes I still think about them, not with bitterness, but as a clear reminder, not every blood tie comes with real love. I gave them countless chances. I kept quiet, kept giving, sacrificed even the smallest things, hoping to be seen, to be acknowledged. But that recognition never came, only growing entitlement and ingratitude. I don't regret letting them go. In fact, it was the first time I chose myself without asking for permission. One early autumn afternoon, with the leaves turning on the trees out front, I pushed Emma's stroller to the park near our neighborhood. She loved the rustling leaves, watching squirrels dart past, and would giggle every time I whistled at the sparrows. People say time heals all wounds. I don't fully believe that. What healed me wasn't time, it was action. It was standing up, clearing out the toxic space around me, and saying enough, even when my voice shook. Emma is growing up in a kind of gentleness I never had. She'll learn that love doesn't come from silence or submission, that a woman doesn't need to carry an entire family to be worthy of affection, and that sometimes strength doesn't mean powering through. It means knowing when to let go. One day, while putting away her toys, I opened an old storage box and found a few baby shower cards from last year. Some messy handwriting, a few generic wishes, and a handful of gifts I couldn't even remember who gave. I thought about throwing them away, but instead I placed them back in the box. Not because I missed them, but because I wanted to remember that I had once hit rock bottom and climbed out on my own. No one lifted me. I walked, one step at a time. From Allison's story, I realized that sometimes the bravest thing isn't forgiveness, it's letting go. Not every relationship is worth keeping, even when it's bound by blood. When you choose yourself, you're not being selfish, you're saving your own life. Allison didn't just reclaim her home, she reclaimed her worth. She proved that peace doesn't come from enduring in silence, but from setting clear boundaries and believing in yourself. What do you think about Allison's decision? Did she do the right thing by setting boundaries with her own family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt stories about family and finding your voice. I'm Harper. If someone ever asked me, how does it feel to be invisible to your own family? I wouldn't know how to answer. Not because I haven't lived it, but because when it happens throughout your entire childhood, it becomes part of the air you breathe. You stop realizing it's wrong or painful. It just exists. I was born in Austin, Texas, into a family of 3 children. My eldest brother, Mason, the type who could turn every head in the room with just a smile. My second brother, Carter, the school's golden athlete, whose every goal was celebrated by my father, Douglas, as if it were a legacy for the entire family. And me? I'm Harper, the youngest daughter they all casually called the girl who doodles nonsense. My father wasn't the yelling type. On the contrary, he was always polite, calm, even too calm. But that very silence was what hurt the most. I still remember vividly the time I won first place in the city's art competition at 12. I had spent an entire week finishing that painting, trembling with excitement as I brought home my certificate to show him. And his reaction? A bland nod, his eyes never leaving the TV screen where Mason was playing soccer. No congratulations, no hug. He didn't even glance at my painting. 10 minutes later, Carter came home from the field, holding a bronze trophy from a small local tournament. My father instantly stood up, took the trophy as if it were a priceless gem, clapped Carter on the back, beaming. "That's my boy." The whole house seemed to light up with his victory, while I stood there, clutching my now crumpled certificate. I wasn't the type of child who whined or caused a scene, but the way my father reserved all his pride for Mason and Carter, while giving me nothing but cold nods, left a deep, lingering scar. For the first time, I asked myself, how much harder do I have to try for him to see me? Mason was always the #1 pride. From debate club president to founding a small startup in college, everything he touched was praised by my father as if he were the sole genius of the family. Carter, though sometimes reckless, only needed a well-timed goal or a photo on the local paper's front page to earn endless bragging rights at every family gathering. And me? I tried everything: literature clubs, art classes, even community service projects. I earned an honors scholarship at 16, started an art initiative for disabled children by myself. But to my father, all of that was nothing more than girls' little hobbies. Last once, I mustered the courage to ask him for money to buy professional art supplies for my project. He looked up from his newspaper just long enough to say, "Harper, you know those kinds of hobbies won't feed you. Be realistic." That sentence cut straight through my self-esteem like a razor-sharp blade. Worse than the rejection was his expression. Not angry, not disdainful, just indifferent. As if I wasn't even there. Family dinners became the familiar stage for my two brothers to shine. My father would ask them about their big plans, their promising opportunities. I sat there quietly, like a misplaced decoration on the table. Every time I tried to speak, he would give a faint smile and steer the conversation elsewhere, as if my words were background noise not worth hearing. The older I got, the clearer it became. In my father's eyes, I was the dull child who would eventually quit everything I started. No one said it out loud. But sometimes, silence weighs heavier than any insult. From that silence, something different began to stir inside me. It wasn't sadness anymore, not the aching need to be seen. It was quieter, heavier, like a slow ember taking hold, biding its time. I couldn't define it back then, but deep down, I made myself a promise. One day, he would look at me, not with detached indifference, but with a recognition so real he couldn't look away. I made that vow at 17, on a night spent alone with nothing but the scratch of my pencil and a wobbly old desk for company. That same day, my father had proudly taken Mason to meet an investor. Carter's latest win was celebrated with cheers on the soccer field. And me? I stayed home, sketching lines that cut deeper than any words spoken in that house. My lips curved, not out of innocence, but with the quiet resolve of someone who had stopped hoping and started preparing. I used to think that if I tried hard enough, one day my father would be proud of me. When I was 18, while my friends flaunted their summer trips and prom dresses, I quietly took a part-time job at an old bookstore on South Congress. Every penny I saved went into evening art classes. I wanted to hold in my hand something undeniable, a success so solid he couldn't look away. I earned a full scholarship to Parsons School of Design, something that up until then only existed in fairy tales about other people's kids. The day I received my acceptance letter, I rushed home, paint stains still on my hands, heart pounding. My father was in the living room, eyes glued to Carter's basketball game on TV. I stood before him, my voice trembling with anticipation. "Dad, I got a full scholarship to Parsons, in New York, one of the top design schools." He looked away from the screen for exactly 3 seconds, only to deliver a dry response. "That career? Does it actually pay the bills? Don't dream too big, Harper. You're not Mason." I heard every word, like shards of glass shattering inside my chest. A few days later, Mason announced he'd landed a summer internship at some small startup. Nothing fancy, just event coordination support. Yet the whole family buzzed with excitement, throwing a backyard barbecue to celebrate his career milestone. My mother, Lorraine, gently pulled me into the kitchen, pressing an old, worn apron into my hands. "Harper, I know you're talented. But you understand, your father, he shows things differently. Don't let it get to you, okay?" Her voice was soft, her eyes filled with quiet sympathy. But I knew the truth. She was trying to keep the house in order, even if that order was built on blatant unfairness. I silently washed each plate of vegetables, listening to Mason's laughter echo from the backyard, where Dad was enthusiastically discussing the brilliant future of the Evans' eldest son. And me? I was just Harper, the girl in the kitchen of her own home, holding a full-ride scholarship that was treated like a crumpled piece of scrap paper. Carter wasn't any less exceptional in Dad's eyes. The time he was named Player of the Week in a school basketball league, Dad didn't hesitate to rent an entire court to throw a congratulatory party. I stood on the sidelines, snapping photos of the event no one asked me to document, like an unpaid employee of my own family. In the days that followed, I kept working at the bookstore, kept attending my art classes, kept submitting portfolios to design competitions around the city. That summer, I poured myself into an art project about Austin's local history, hoping to have it exhibited at the city's art museum gallery. And miraculously, it happened. I received an acceptance letter. My project would be showcased for 3 months in the fall. I had dreamed of that moment through countless nights, dreamed of Dad visiting the gallery, standing before my large canvas with pride in his eyes, dreamed of him introducing me to others, saying, "This is my daughter, she did this." But when I brought the letter home, Dad barely glanced up from Mason's financial report. "A local exhibition, huh? Nothing to make a fuss about, Harper. Focus on getting a stable job instead." I stared at him, searching for a flicker of emotion in those cold, gray eyes. But there was nothing, only that suffocating indifference. That evening, when Mason brought his new girlfriend home for dinner, the house was once again filled with cheerful chatter. Dad poured wine, laughing and making conversation, as if the exhibition letter I had shown him hours earlier never existed. I sat at the corner of the dining table, wearing the white dress I had carefully chosen for what was supposed to be a special day. But tonight, it felt utterly out of place. I listened as they spoke of Mason's promising future, of Carter's shot at going pro. No one asked when my exhibition would open. No one asked what my painting meant. And it was in that moment I realized maybe I would never get from them what I wanted. No matter how much I achieved, my efforts would always be trampled under the shadow of my brothers. But there was something Dad didn't know. My silence wasn't surrender. That night, while they continued chatting about Mason and Carter, I quietly went upstairs, closing the door firmly behind me. The small room, crowded with unfinished sketches, felt more suffocating than ever. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the painting I had just finished for the exhibition. An image of Austin's old alleys, where everyday stories hid beneath layers of nostalgic colors. But tonight, it wasn't just a painting. It was a reminder that I had already done more than enough. For the first time, I admitted a bitter truth to myself. There would never be a day when Dad looked at me with pride. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because, in his world, I was never meant to exist as something to be proud of. And strangely, realizing that didn't hurt anymore. There was only an odd lightness, and within it something new was quietly taking shape. A resolve, a goal detached from him now, belonging entirely to me. I would draw, I would create. Not for Dad's approval, but to stand tall in a world that had always wanted me to keep my head down. The following week, I accepted an internship offer at a small design studio in downtown Austin. Low pay, long hours, but I didn't hesitate. It was the first time I truly stepped out of my family's shadow, into a place where no one knew me as Mason's little sister or Douglas Evans' daughter. There, I was just Harper, and that was enough. I started with the tasks no one wanted: fixing file errors, making coffee, building color palettes for picky clients. Some nights, I stayed at the studio until 2 a.m., quietly adjusting tiny details on a design draft, only to hear my boss glance at it and say, "Good, keep going." But unlike my father, the indifference in this environment actually fueled me, because here, results are the only language that matters. No golden suns, no invisible favoritism, just whether you can deliver or not. That pressure forged a habit in me. Never quit. No one would comfort you when you're exhausted. No one would cheer when you do well. But if you fall, the world will keep moving without even glancing back. And I swore I wouldn't fall. I poured every penny from my bookstore job, plus the meager paycheck from the studio, into buying a used laptop and upgrading my design software. On weekends, while friends went out or gathered with family, I sat alone in a small cafe by the Colorado River, sketching concept drafts for personal projects. I built a simple website, uploading my work, adding blog posts about art and the stories behind each piece. I didn't wait for someone to discover me. I made myself worth discovering. That November, an article about my community art project unexpectedly featured in the Austin Chronicle's Silent Young Talent section. They called me the silent designer. I didn't tell my family. There was no reason to. That article wasn't for their pride. It was for me. To know I was on the right path. Winter came. While Mason continued being praised at business mixers and Carter busied himself with sponsorship deals, I quietly signed a branding contract for a rising cafe in the Domain District. It wasn't $1 million project, but seeing the logo I designed printed on every menu and coffee cup, right there, I understood what real value felt like. No flashy stage, no father's approval, just the simple truth, I was doing good work and I knew it. From that moment, every lingering sadness I had carried turned into burning motivation. Every time Dad boasted about Mason or Carter at family gatherings, I would smile. A different kind of smile. No more waiting, no more resentment. Because now I knew. The day I shine won't be the day they clap for me. It will be the day they're simply unable to ignore me. To most people, starting a business conjures images of flashy presentations, investors shaking hands under bright lights. But for me, Harper Evans, it started with a makeshift desk in a rundown apartment on the outskirts of Austin, Texas. No capital, no team. Just me, a used laptop, and a head full of ideas that kept me awake every night. I decided to create a branding design studio for small businesses. Not because it was an easy market, quite the opposite. I knew I'd be competing with countless big-budget agencies. But that's exactly why I chose to start with people like me, the ones starting from nothing, needing a hand to pull them out of the same shadows I once lived in. I named the studio Inkspire, a blend of ink and inspire. Simple, but for me, it was a declaration. I wanted to use my art to tell stories for those who'd been overlooked. But noble ideals don't pay rent. The first 3 months were harsher than anything I'd imagined. Every morning at 5 a.m., I'd design flyers and cheap banners for small diners in the East Side. At night, I freelanced online for barely enough to buy another cheap bag of coffee. No applause, no encouragement. And of course, my family never once asked about that art job that won't lead anywhere. Whenever exhaustion hit me, I'd remember Dad's words, "Don't dream too big, Harper." Strangely enough, that disdain became the very fuel that kept me moving. I taught myself 3D design, video editing, and digital brand optimization. With no mentor, I became my own teacher. I failed constantly, revised endlessly, but I gritted my teeth and kept going. Many nights, while the entire city slept, I sat hunched over my screen, eyes burning from coding website interfaces. There were times I thought I'd break. But oddly, the loneliness only made me stronger. Then, a small opportunity appeared. A newly opened bakery called Clover and Crust was looking for someone to design their entire brand identity. Their budget was modest, but they believed in people who were also starting from zero. I sent them a concept, crafted with every ounce of my passion. Thankfully, they chose Inkspire. That project wasn't just my first real order. It was a turning point. I spent 2 weeks surveying, talking with every bakery staff, understanding their story. I didn't sell them a logo. I told their story through colors, fonts, every tiny detail on their packaging. On the grand opening day, seeing customers take photos with the sign I designed, I stood quietly on the street corner, feeling my spine straighten for the first time. Dad wasn't there. Neither was anyone from my family. But for the first time, I didn't need them. That small success opened other doors. Willow Brew Cafe reached out. Then came Ember Glow, a boutique candle shop. None of them were industry giants. But they chose me because they knew I understood what it felt like to be overlooked. I didn't become rich overnight. Payments were still late, bills still piled up. But bit by bit, Inkspire began to find its place. I rented a small office on the second floor of an old building, where the window overlooked a tree-lined street. The desk was simple, but stacked with fresh designs, each one like a small brick building, the future I was crafting with my own hands. Every morning, stepping into that room, I reminded myself, this is where I start. Not to earn someone's approval, but to prove that I don't need to live in anyone's shadow. And I knew the tough days ahead would be long. But this time, I'd walk with a different posture. After over a year of persistence with Inkspire, I realized something. Real success doesn't make noise. It doesn't arrive with roaring applause or grand speeches. It's quiet but steady, like a drop of water patiently carving through stone. Starting with small, local contracts, Inkspire had become a name sought out by small and medium businesses in Austin. From cafes, bakeries, to rising tech startups, they chose me not for a flashy budget, but because they saw someone who had walked the same path from zero. Inkspire's first team had only 3 people. Ethan, a graphic freelancer once let go for being too creative for minor projects. Chloe, a senior marketing student rejected for lack of real-world experience. And me, the girl tired of waiting for a nod from her family. We worked in a rented office on the 3rd floor of an old building on Guadalupe Street. Low-ceilinged, dusty glass windows. But for me, it was the first base I truly owned. Every morning I walked into that office with a different mindset, not the girl shrinking at the table anymore while Dad boasted about Mason and Carter. Now, I was the one running a growing business, making decisions, steering my own dream. We worked like people racing against stolen time. Mornings brainstorming at cafes, nights editing pixels for demanding clients. Ethan often joked, at Inkspire, deadlines are our religion and coffee is our lifeblood. Success started knocking in the quietest ways. A brand identity project for the Bloom and Thorn flower shop chain went viral on social media, bringing in waves of new contracts. Then came the branding for Austin Food Fest 2023. And suddenly, everything changed. Small investors reached out. They weren't throwing money at fantasies. They saw real value in what Inkspire was doing, helping small brands tell their stories. And we were the ones to do it. But with my family, nothing had changed. Dad still proudly flaunted Mason, now Director of Strategic Development at a tech firm. Carter remained the sports golden boy, recently signing as a brand ambassador for a major athletic brand. And Harper? That name never once came up at family dinners. Yet the bitterness had faded. In fact, their silence gave me a precious gift. No expectations, no pressure, no judgmental eyes. Quietly, I kept building Inkspire. The worn office on Guadalupe was replaced by a bright modern workspace in South Congress. For the first time, I signed a lease under my own name. No guarantor needed. I spoke at business panels as a guest speaker, sharing how to build a brand from humble beginnings. Without anyone's backing, I confidently stood before hundreds, telling my story. A story built not under spotlights but through sweat and countless sleepless nights. One day, after a conference, I ran into Mason in the lobby. He was with a group of partners, looking polished and confident, as always. We locked eyes for a brief second. He gave a faint, polite nod. I looked him straight in the eye and smiled. A calm, knowing smile. Enough for him to understand that everything had changed. I didn't need them to acknowledge it right away, because I knew the right moment would come. And my silence wasn't submission anymore. It was preparation for the final reckoning. For the past 2 years, the name Harper Evans hadn't been mentioned at our family dinners, but that didn't mean I had disappeared. I'd just been busy, preparing for my grand return. When Inkspire officially secured a partnership with Artisan Fresh, a supermarket chain expanding nationwide, I knew the timing was right. No longer confined to small local projects, Inkspire was now ready to compete with major players on the US branding map. And that's when another opportunity surfaced. Orion Ventures, the financial firm where my father, Douglas Evans, had served as vice president for over a decade, was seeking a partner for a full brand overhaul after a series of PR scandals. They needed someone fresh, capable of reviving their image. Among the nominated firms, Inkspire's name came up, recommended by the very small businesses my father once dismissed. The irony? Orion had no idea who was behind Inkspire. I sat in that glass-walled meeting room downtown, facing familiar faces from my father's office portraits. They negotiated, discussed, and ultimately signed the partnership deal with Inkspire, purely based on merit, unaware that the doodling little girl was about to hold the keys to their brand's future. I signed that contract under my new legal name, Harper Lane. I had changed my last name 6 months ago, a decision no one knew about, and frankly, no one cared. But then, I was the one who sent a single, cold message into our long-dead family group chat. I'll be attending this year's Father's Day dinner. That was it. No question mark, no emojis. My mother, Lorraine, replied quickly with a weak smile emoji, trying to appear cheerful. Mason and Carter? Silence, as if my presence was still just a shadow not worth acknowledging. What they didn't know was that this time, that shadow had form, weight, and enough substance to shake the very ground they stood on. A week before the Father's Day dinner, I walked into the Lucent dealership showroom and signed for a graphite gray coupe, the exact model my father once admired but always brushed off with financial practicality excuses. I paid in full. No bank loans, no co-signers. My money, from the contracts they never bothered to notice. On the passenger seat of that brand new car was a thin but heavy stack of papers, the contract transferring brand control of Orion Ventures to Inkspire. A meticulously drafted agreement, giving Inkspire full authority to restructure Orion's brand image, with that control resting solely in my hands. For years, they were used to seeing Harper as the forgotten name at the dinner table. I wanted to see their faces when they realized the not good enough daughter was about to hold the fate of the company they proudly flaunted. That day, I chose a simple yet sharp ivory suit. I didn't need Mason's flashy designer labels, nor Carter's polished athlete look. What I needed was confidence, from myself. Something they had never taught me how to have in over 20 years. The coupe glided smoothly down familiar Austin streets, its engine purring beneath my foot like a quiet reminder. It's time to end this tired old play. As I parked in front of the Evans estate, the first eyes to catch mine were my father's. A subtle furrow of his brow as he recognized the car, a flash of confusion as he struggled to place my face with the poised figure he hadn't expected to see. Mason stepped out onto the porch, wearing his usual smug grin. Carter fiddled with his shirt collar, not even bothering to look up. I stepped out of the car, a light breeze brushing past the neatly tied bun at my nape. I didn't greet loudly, didn't force a smile. I simply walked into the courtyard, the place that never had space for me, with the stride of someone who now knew they belonged more than anyone else. In my hand was a slim folder, secured in black leather. I looked at my father and smiled. Dad, this year I brought you a special Father's Day gift. His smile faltered for a split second. I saw the flicker of doubt and irritation behind his eyes. But I stayed silent, because tonight, that silence would be my sharpest weapon. Inside the Evans estate, the scene was painfully familiar. Warm yellow lights, a long table draped in white linen, crystal glasses glinting under candlelight. The same old stories were being recycled, the same fake laughter circling the room. As if I had never left. Mason, clad in his navy blazer, was proudly boasting about his latest collaboration with a real estate investment firm in Dallas. Carter eagerly chimed in about his new endorsement deal with a sports brand, with my mother Lorraine offering polite, dutiful praise. though her eyes occasionally softened when they flickered toward me. And my father, Douglas Evans, sat at the head of the table, basking in his role as king of this tiny empire. He nodded, raised his glass, each gesture a reminder of the years he had trampled over my existence. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, the black leather folder resting on my lap. Every glance that passed over me treated me as if I were just an empty chair filling a spot. When Carter finished bragging about his statewide marketing campaign, my father lifted his glass again, eyes gleaming with near-arrogant pride. My two sons know how to hold their heads high in life, one elevating the Evans family in the investment world, the other, the face of Texas sports. Truly a blessing. Then he paused. I knew what was coming next, right on cue. And then he glanced at me, lips curling into a dismissive smirk. And as for the failure over there, no need to mention. Probably still busy drawing logos for some corner bakery, right, Harper? Mason let out a sharp laugh. Carter tapped the table, nodding as if he'd just witnessed premium entertainment. Kind of sad, really, Mason added, voice laced with mock pity. But not everyone's cut out to be a leader, right, Dad? I heard every word, each syllable like an old knife they had sharpened once more, slicing deeper into my pride. But this time, the difference was I didn't feel hurt. I was just waiting for them to fully expose their blind arrogance before I dropped the final curtain. As the laughter died down, I placed my glass on the table. The soft clink echoed like a period, ending the farce. Oh, fitting, I said slowly. No need to raise my voice, yet enough to command attention. Today really is a perfect day to talk about success. The room fell silent. I have a little story to share, too, if you'll allow me, Dad. Douglas narrowed his eyes, waving a dismissive hand. It's about your little design projects, Harper. Let's not waste dinner time. We're discussing bigger things here. I smiled. Then let me keep it brief. Calmly, I opened the black leather folder on my lap, pulling out a document printed on fine stock paper. Orion Ventures just finalized a brand restructuring contract with Inkspire. You all know Inkspire, right? No answer. Of course they didn't. My company. That so-called failure. Dad. I stood, walked to the center of the table, and placed the contract right in front of Douglas. His face darkened. His hand, still holding a wineglass, trembled slightly. This is the agreement confirming Inkspire will take full control of Orion Ventures' brand image for the next 5 years, including approval over all media campaigns, public relations strategies, and senior leadership representation. I paused, locking eyes with him. In other words, Dad, starting today, anyone wanting to use the Orion name in press, media, or any public materials will need my signature first. Mason's brow furrowed. Carter leaned back, his face visibly paling. Douglas Evans stayed silent, his gaze fixed on the document like it was a death sentence for the pride he had so carefully built. Is this a joke? Mason growled, but the shake in his voice betrayed him. I shook my head, slowly. No, Mason. This is reality. As real as every time Dad dismissed my efforts, every time he said, not worth mentioning when it came to me. Today, I'm simply giving you all a different reality. The reality where I now control the very brand Dad's career is tied to. I closed the folder, turned toward the door. Happy Father's Day, Dad. From now on, every time you want to be in the media, remember, I'll be the one approving that photo first. I left the table, their stunned faces frozen behind me, and as the door to the Evans estate shut quietly behind me, I knew they'd never be able to ignore me again. I had thought that just the Orion Ventures restructuring contract would be enough to wake the family up. It was wrong. Douglas Evans was still Douglas Evans. He sat in silence, staring at the paper, his face rigid, as if his pride was clinging to its last breath. Mason forced a chuckle, shaking his head. "It's just a branding contract, Harper. Don't think that means you belong at this table with us." I said nothing. Instead, I unlocked my phone and sent a brief message. 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang. It was Jonathan Price, legal director of Evercrest Holdings, the firm that had just finalized the acquisition of 68% of Orion Ventures barely a week ago. A deal, of course, my father and family had no clue Inkspire had orchestrated behind the scenes. Jonathan placed a thick envelope in front of Douglas, a professional glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Mr. Evans, I believe you'll want to review these documents. Evercrest Holdings has officially completed the acquisition of a controlling stake in Orion Ventures. One key condition of the deal is the transfer of executive authority to the strategic partner who rebuilt Orion's brand value over the past 6 months. He paused, turned to me, smiling knowingly. And that partner, of course, is Miss Harper Lane. The air grew heavy. Douglas slumped back into his chair, pale, his hands trembling as they clenched the envelope. Mason opened his mouth to object, but Jonathan continued smoothly. "For clarity, as of today, all decisions concerning Orion Ventures will be finalized by acting CEO Ms. Harper Lane. Mr. Evans will transition to an honorary advisory role, with no executive authority." Carter leaned back, exhaling sharply in frustration. I stepped forward, unhurried. "To put it simply, starting today, I'm your boss, Douglas, and I'll be deciding exactly how you appear in the financial world from here on out." He looked up at me, and for the first time that gaze was stripped bare. No arrogance, no dismissal. Just a man watching his carefully built empire crumble. But the finale wasn't over yet. I pulled another document from my bag. A copy of the personal property ownership transfer. Oh, and one more thing. The Evans estate. Funny enough, do you know who the current legal owner is, Dad? Douglas froze. "You mortgaged it to cover Orion's losses last year, and when Orion became part of Evercrest, the collateral came with the deal. In other words, this house now belongs to Inkspire." I emphasized each word. "And Inkspire belongs to me." The tension was suffocating. Mason's grip on his glass whitened his knuckles. Carter stared down at his cold, untouched plate. My mother, Lorraine, sat motionless, her hands trembling slightly, eyes glistening with words left unsaid. I stood tall, arms crossed, eyes locked on Douglas. "I don't need your approval anymore, Dad, because you no longer have the power to give it. Now, you're the one who'll need permission to exist in my world. But don't worry, I won't throw you out of this house. Evans is a name I've left behind, but this place is still the home where I grew up. It doesn't need to be tied to your cruelty to keep standing." Douglas slumped back in his chair, eyes half closed, like a cracked statue finally crumbling. I turned and walked away from the dining room, each step deliberate, unhurried. The door of the mansion closed behind me, not as a barrier between childhood naivety and indifference, but as the final period to the chapter where I once bowed my head, begging for approval. I didn't need their applause for my victory. From the girl cast aside in the family's narrative, I had rewritten the ending. With my own hands. The daughter once labeled the failure, now owned everything they thought I'd never reach. After the door shut behind me, the Evans family's mask finally began to crack. The man who once sat at the head of the table like an immovable rock, his head held high as if all of Austin owed him reverence, was now trembling. His hands, once firm in signing multi-million-dollar deals, now shook as they gripped the stack of papers, weighed down by the very pride he had carried his whole life. No one knew what to say. Mason sat frozen. The eldest brother, the one who once scoffed that I only designed bakery logos, now stared into empty space, as if the world he knew had been ripped apart. Carter, always the liveliest, now sat with his head bowed, fingers nervously twisting a crumpled napkin. My father still hadn't looked up, He was rereading every word of that contract, as if doing so could somehow rewrite reality. But the truth didn't care. Is it really her? His voice cracked, breaking. The one I've... He stopped, swallowing hard. The silver strands in his hair glistened under the soft lights, exposing the age he had long refused to acknowledge. She's not a failure, he finally muttered, eyes locked on my signature at the bottom of the page. She's everything. No one argued. Mason clenched his fists, the soft crack of his knuckles filling the suffocating silence. He shot up from his seat, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. What is this? She can't. Mason looked around, desperate for agreement. She can't go from the failure to controlling Orion Ventures in just 2 years. It's impossible. Carter lifted his head, but his usual superiority was gone. But it happened, Mason. That paper doesn't lie. She did it. Douglas closed his eyes. Everything he had built, the Evans legacy, his vice president title at Orion, was now just a hollow shell beneath his youngest daughter's hand. The daughter he never believed was good enough to stand beside her brothers. He had never imagined this scenario. In his mind, Harper would always be the girl who doodled, a quiet shadow at family dinners. But when he opened his eyes, reality was brutal. That very shadow had flipped the table he once ruled. I should have seen it sooner, Douglas said hoarsely. The way she stayed silent, it was how she prepared her strike. Mason gritted his teeth, his voice sharp with disbelief. I don't get it. How did we let this happen? How could she... For the first time, my mother spoke. Her voice was soft but unwavering. Because she did what you two never would. She listened, she learned, she was patient, not to earn your father's praise, but to stand on her own feet. She didn't look at anyone, quietly clearing the untouched, now cold, dishes from the table. Douglas slowly rose to his feet. His eyes, once clouded with arrogance, now held only stark clarity. He knew. The moment he uttered the failure doesn't count, tonight was the last time he would ever believe he controlled this family. She's won, he repeated, not in resignation, but in a painful acceptance. But the worst part isn't that she won. It's that we let her grow up under so much disregard. We never saw her surpass us until it was too late. The room fell into a heavy silence. No one dared say the word failure again. No one dared laugh. Mason slumped back into his chair. Carter remained silent. My mother continued stacking dishes as if the dinner had merely left a stain to be wiped away, not the ruins of a shattered dynasty. But deep down, they all knew. That night, the Evans family lost the invisible power they once believed would last forever. I walked out of the Evans mansion into an eerily quiet evening. No one called after me. No one tried to stop me. Only the sound of my heels echoed, striking the stone pavement with steady rhythm across the vast courtyard that used to make me feel so small. The Lucent coupe sat neatly under the driveway lights. I opened the door, and the dashboard greeted me with a familiar message. "Welcome back, Miss Lane." I smiled. It took me nearly 30 years to learn a simple truth. Recognition is not something you beg from others. It's something you create for yourself. My family, with all their polished facades, may have never truly cherished me. But from tonight on, they would never be able to ignore me again. I glanced at the mansion one last time through the rearview mirror. That place had once been the cradle of my father's pride, the stage where Mason and Carter basked under his admiring gaze. And I had always been the quiet shadow standing in the wings. They had grown far too comfortable not seeing me. But tonight, I had stepped onto that very stage, illuminated by the light of my own making. Not the spotlight they reserved for others. And they, the ones who once dismissed me, had been forced to bow to that truth. I didn't do it for revenge, not to watch them crumble. I did it for myself. For the 12-year-old girl who once stood in the living room, clutching a city art competition certificate, waiting in vain for a single word of praise from her father. For those evenings, cleaning floors at the bookstore, saving every dime for art classes, while Mason dined at fine restaurants and Carter graced local news headlines, where the nights hunched over an old desk, eyes bloodshot from exhaustion, painstakingly refining every design detail, only to be dismissed as useless the next day. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. A message from Chloe, my trusted partner at Inkspire. Artisan Fresh just opened their first store in New York. They want you to be the creative director for the entire brand system. I smiled. I didn't need a loud family dinner to validate my worth. Every small client, every project I poured my heart into, was the clearest validation I could ever need. The car turned onto Barton Springs Road, city lights reflecting off the windshield like soft trails of stars. The feeling was different, light but profound, as if, for the first time in all these years, I was truly breathing air that was mine. On the way home, I remembered a quote I once read while working at the bookstore. True strength is living without needing applause. I am the one who saved my own life. And to me, that is the greatest victory. Harper's story proves that self-worth doesn't come from others' recognition, especially from those who once looked down on you. Silence, persistence, and unwavering resolve are the sharpest weapons to conquer success. In real life, we all crave to be seen. But only when we learn to stand tall and create our own value do we become truly free. Harper didn't need her family's applause because she answered the question, "Who am I?" through her own grit and achievements. What do you think about Harper's journey in the downfall of those hollow family idols? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more meaningful, emotional stories about family and life.